The development of Painkiller had an interesting context, especially because it marks the attempt to revive a classic FPS franchise, which was highly revered in the 2000s. The game was officially revealed in March 2025 at the Future Games Show Spring Showcase, with development led by Anshar Studios and published by 3D Realms under the Saber Interactive label. The project is part of the Embracer Group's strategy, which owns the rights to the franchise to capitalize on re-releases of cult classics. Unlike the original studios and the teams that made the previous ones, Anshar was until then better known for support work on other games, such as the Silent Hill 2 remake and Layers of Fears, and did not have a history in first-person shooters, which already brought the expectation of a different approach from the original. The development with Anshar brought a modern direction to the series, focusing strongly on a cooperative experience for up to 3 players, whether online or offline with bots. This is a significant change in the original formula, which was essentially a fast-paced, brutal solo shooter. The new Painkiller bets on combining classic elements, such as the return of emblematic weapons and the tarot card mechanic for customization and power evolution, with new movements, including dash, double jump, and the use of a grappling hook to traverse more vertical areas. This demonstrates an effort by the developers to update the gameplay to current standards while maintaining the soul of brutality and fast action. A personally interesting point in this context is that Anshar also gave importance to the level design, creating vast biomes and extremely detailed gothic environments that amplify the macabre and apocalyptic atmosphere so loved by fans. Furthermore, the presence of gigantic bosses, called Nephilim, who are monstrous children of the fallen angel Azazel, expands the scale of the battles and brings a challenge that harks back to the great moments of the original game, but now with even more epic visuals and combat. This suggests that the studio not only gave it a graphical overhaul, but also invested heavily in expanding the immersive and visceral experience of the Painkiller universe. The inclusion of playable characters with unique abilities and perks, Ink, Void, Soul, and Roche, adds an extra layer of strategy and personalization, which makes the experience less generic in multiplayer and gives reasons to invest hours in the cooperative mode. This decision apparently sought to cater to a modern audience that values builds and agency in gameplay, in addition to promoting synergy among players in a group. However, this choice breaks a bit the spirit of the classic one gun, one hero that perhaps some more purist fans might miss, but which, in my view, is necessary to give new life to an FPS whose original formula is already beginning to look limited for the current market. A personal reflection on the challenge of offering a reinvention of a cult classic without losing its identity is also valid. The original Painkiller, released in 2004, had a unique charm, which mixed insane levels of action with a gothic atmosphere and visceral speedrun. This creates a very high expectation, which can both benefit the hype and weigh against the game if it distances itself too much from what the public expects. From a creative perspective, I trust the fact that Anshar, collaborating with 3D Realms and Saber, managed to maintain the balance between innovation and respect for the origin, especially by focusing on the cooperative experience and frantic combat, something that has always been the heart of Painkiller. It is also worth noting that this project also appears to be one of Anshar Studios' first major tests in the shooter genre, which implies risks and opportunities. Many players were keen to know if the franchise's new owners and this new team would deliver the same adrenaline as the past, especially because the Old People Can Fly team, who developed the original Painkiller, is now focused on other projects. In my view, the development of Painkiller 2025 reflects the clear intention to create a game that is respected both as a nostalgic re-release and as a modern title, which prioritizes immediate fun and cooperation, a sensible and current path to revive a brand that needs to win over both old fans and today's players. Painkiller brings a first-person shooter vibe that resurrects the classic feel of the franchise, but with a modern look, focused on cooperation for up to 3 players, either online or with bots offline. The game maintains intense and frantic action, where the main objective is to slaughter hordes of demons in closed arenas, which creates an accelerated and continuous rhythm. Incidentally, this is the highlight for me. The game leaves no room for pauses or boredom. You are always on the move, shooting, jumping, and using the dash to escape attacks. This pleasurable dynamic reminded me a lot of old-school shooters, but with a modern touch that values mobility and fluidity in combat. The levels are designed to take advantage of the character's high degree of mobility, who has 2 jumps and an aerial dash, in addition to level design elements that encourage acrobatic movements. It's a feast for those who like gameplay based on rhythm and fast action, with fixed points to grapple onto, platforms to jump from, and even the possibility of being punished by a wrong move that sends you to a fatal fall. This combination makes the game much more interesting than other shooters that only offer direct shooting, because here it is necessary to think a little about positioning and timing, which adds a layer of strategy even though the game is quite mindless in its essence. The iconic weapon Painkiller, which gives the game its name, has a special role and is used both to restore ammo and for special finishers on mini-bosses, which brings a very cool risk and reward mechanic. It's fascinating how the game manages to balance this classic element with other new and re-released weapons, such as the stake gun, which works almost like a sniper rifle, and the electro driver, which has a rapid fire and can be upgraded to create explosive effects. The arsenal, in general, is one of the points that I like the most, because it offers enough variety to keep the gameplay fresh, in addition to allowing upgrades that make each weapon almost an extension of your personal strategies. Another point that draws attention in the gameplay is the roguelike mode called Rogue Angel, which randomizes the arenas and adds modifiers, making each match unique and challenging. This creates an incentive for replayability that is fundamental for me in a game of this style, since despite the repetitive action, it gains new breadth with the variations and choices in the tactical parts, such as the selection of tarot cards that grant temporary powers. I felt that this offers the player freedom to personalize their experience, which avoids the feeling of sameness that could easily appear in a horde-focused shooter. The 3-player cooperation is another highlight of the gameplay, as the game was structured so that you are never alone even when playing offline, with bots that prove to be competent in assisting during battles. The possibility of reviving fallen companions adds a little tension and maintains the pace, in addition to strengthening the feeling of teamwork, something that deviates from the traditional focus of solo shooters. For me, this increases the fun factor, as you can relieve the pressure and enjoy it with friends, making Painkiller a great option for relaxed and social sessions, even though the game does not have a deep plot or very complex mechanics. Regarding the difficulty and enemy design, Painkiller maintains the tradition of facing violent swarms of adversaries who are not very intelligent, but numerous and aggressive. This creates a bullet hell scenario where the constant flow of enemies requires quick reflexes and good movement, but without the need to stick to very elaborate tactics. A cool head is not as demanded as in other more cerebral shooters, which for me is a relief because the objective is pure frantic entertainment and non-stop killing, and it does that very well. The mini-bosses and enemy variations break up the monotony a bit, but of course, one can miss a greater diversity to keep the game even more interesting from beginning to end. Painkiller delivers a gameplay experience that, for me, is perfect for those looking for a cooperative shooter that doesn't take itself too seriously, but which is exciting and rewards dexterity and fast movement, the intense rhythm, the sense of progression with weapon upgrades, the roguelike mechanic, and accessible cooperation make the experience fun and totally uncomplicated. Don't expect something deep or revolutionary, but rather a shooter that values simple, direct fun. A breath of fresh air amidst so many heavy and complex games today. If I had to summarize, I would say that the game positions itself with personality by embracing a modern boomer shooter style, combining nostalgia with current elements, and it is this balance that won me over. Especially for playing with friends and venting frustration on those afternoons or evenings when what you want is quick action without complications. By focusing on solid gameplay and replayability, it honors the original series and still brings something new with the roguelike touch and dynamic movement, making me feel that it is well worth it for those who like the genre but want something more relaxed and cooperative at the same time. The story unfolds in a dark and gothic setting, where the player wakes up in purgatory, a place of condemnation after their sins against heaven. This setting already brings the oppressive and intense feeling that the game seeks to deliver, maintaining the visceral essence that made the classic franchise so revered. The protagonist is a sinner who receives a unique chance of redemption from the very voice of the creator, a desperate attempt to cleanse his flaws by assuming the role of a divine champion who must prevent a greater threat. This moral and epic premise makes the story more engaging, giving it a tone of a journey of redemption, but also of judgment and constant struggle. The central conflict revolves around the fallen angel Azazel, a villain with an apocalyptic mission, to open the gates for his demonic armies to invade Earth. Azazel is not a generic antagonist. He symbolizes celestial corruption and the imminent ruin of everything we know, which elevates the plot to an existential battle between light, shadow, and redemption. The narrative unfolds as the player battles hordes of grotesque demons, including powerful bosses and the Nephilim, Azazel's monstrous children. a design choice that reinforces the dark and menacing mythology of the game's universe. The characteristic that most draws attention to the story for me is the way it connects directly with the sense of urgency and brutality of the gameplay. Being trapped between hell and a possible path to salvation accentuates the emotional drama, making the player feel that every battle against the demonic hordes is a matter of life and death, not only for the character, but for the world. This narrative immersion, reinforced by the rich Gothic setting and the grotesque enemies, brings a greater weight that goes beyond simply shooting at monsters. Another striking point of the story are the playable characters, Ink, Void, Soul, and Roach. Each of them brings unique abilities that represent different aspects of combat and survival in this infernal purgatory. This choice is not just a gameplay artifice, but complements the narrative in several ways, suggesting that redemption can have multiple paths, and that the fight to stop Azazel is plural. The fact that the player can experiment with different styles reflects a story in which each character carries their own burden of sins and potential for salvation, which I found quite interesting. The introduction of a tarot card system that influences progress in the story and the unlocking of abilities brings a very cool metaphorical layer to the plot. The tarot usually symbolizes destinies, choices, and hidden paths, and its use here fits perfectly with the theme of the protagonist's judgment and the uncertainty about his future. This seems to me a very creative way of connecting game mechanics with the narrative, where each decision within the progression directly impacts the way this story about redemption and condemnation will be experienced. The main campaign mode then focuses on defeating Azazel and his followers before the Earth falls into complete darkness. But the game doesn't stop there. Painkiller 2025 introduces the Rogue Angel mode, a roguelike experience that expands the campaign's universe and narrative, suggesting that the fight against the infernal forces is endless and dynamic. This mode features procedurally generated arenas and encounters with epic bosses, increasing the narrative tension and constantly challenging the player to prove their strength and value, as if redemption were an eternal cycle. Personally, I think the story was well constructed to balance homage to the classic and modern innovation. It doesn't just rely on gore and violence, but also invests in a narrative that gives meaning to the game's brutality. The setting, the themes of redemption and judgment, and the mythology of the characters create a backdrop that seems much richer than expected in a frantic shooter. For those who enjoy games with intense stories and a dark touch, Painkiller captures this atmosphere of internal and external struggle, of being a condemned warrior trying to save what remains. And for me, this delivers a game that respects both the legacy and the evolution of the genre. The game presents graphics that follow a more modern line, but which do not necessarily surprise due to the most advanced technical aspect, seeking a balance between style and performance. The visual aesthetic focuses on a dark, infernal theme, which rescues the horror and chaos atmosphere that made the original famous, but with a graphical interpretation that refers to current first-person shooters, such as Doom, mixing Gothic elements with contemporary lighting and texturing effects. One of the most distinct aspects of the graphics in this version is the use of the most updated Unreal Engine, which allows modeling environments with Gothic biomes and vertical levels to explore. The game seeks to maintain a visually rich with atmospheric details, with dynamic lighting and effects such as volumetric fog and reflections, giving more depth and local realism to the scenes, although it is still not considered top of the line compared to other recent AAA productions. In my opinion, the highlight of the graphics lies precisely in the treatment given to the lighting. Dynamic and real-time lighting brings a special charm to the game, creating very immersive effects, especially in dark locations where lights and shadows move convincingly. There is a certain weight in the contrast between light and shadow, which makes the environments tense, a quality that lives up to the atmosphere of a fast-paced action and horror game, and deepens the climate of tension and mystery. Furthermore, the game's graphics incorporate details such as illuminated fog effects, reflections, and the transmission of light through materials, such as colored glass, which brings an interesting harmony between dark elements and points of light that highlight the level design. This creates a much richer visual experience with a variety of small effects that elevate the visual experience without necessarily requiring state-of-the-art hardware. However, I cannot fail to mention that despite these qualities, some graphic elements may still seem dated or not fully explored. The intensity and consistency of the graphic setting vary from stage to stage, and at times the game delivers relatively simple textures or lacks certain expected effects, which can slightly break the immersion for those accustomed to higher graphical standards in the current market. Another point I perceive is that the graphics end up prioritizing the artistic design and the fluidity of the gameplay more than the ultra-realistic visual, which is a good choice to maintain the frenetic rhythm characteristic of the series. The movement of characters and enemies is accompanied by visual effects that enhance fast action, explosions and weapons keeping the focus on combat and fun, but making it clear that the game is not for those looking for a photorealistic visual spectacle. Visually, Painkiller adopts a modern look, without getting lost in exaggerated technical complexity, focusing on creating a visual atmosphere that directly supports the infernal chaos and intensity of the gameplay. For me, the graphics work well precisely because they don't try to be more than they are. An old-school shooting experience with a new visual look that adds personality and improves the game's atmosphere without giving up quick and explosive fun. The performance delivers an experience that is, above all, aligned with the proposal of being a calm and accessible cooperative FPS, maintaining adequate fluidity and responsiveness for quick and fun matches. Unlike what is expected from AAA blockbusters, the game does not seek to exaggerate the graphics or require extreme hardware, focusing more on stability and the game's dynamic itself. On PC, the performance reveals an interesting balance, running well without major slowdowns on most modern setups. Although it may present small FPS drops in scenes with many visual effects, especially involving intense combat or environments loaded with details. On consoles like PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, the performance remains solid with a good stable frame rate, ensuring fluid gameplay essential for the game's frenetic pace, even if the focus is not absolute graphical excellence. One thing that draws a lot of attention in the performance is the optimization that the developer managed to extract to run the game with a good graphic level, but without going crazy with resource consumption. It is possible to play in 4K, especially on latest generation consoles, with FPS close to 60 frames per second, which is more than enough for the proposal, but there may be small oscillations in moments with many enemies or effects on the screen. On PC, the experience may vary depending on the configuration, and the game uses modern technologies such as DLSs and FSR to alleviate the heavy hardware requirement, but nothing too exaggerated to the point of being frustrating. Even so, there are small drops and occasional stutterings, especially on systems with more modest hardware, which is not exactly surprising considering the more indie mid-tier style of the title. The game stands out for maintaining a very solid frame rate, without always having to resort to artificial graphical artifices that some games use to mask a lack of optimization, such as frame generation. This brings a much more legitimate feeling of control and fluidity in combat, something that is fundamental for games of this style, since any stuttering or sudden drop can compromise the experience in a fast and challenging cooperative session. Particularly, the personal experience with the sense of control in combat is excellent, thanks to this performance stability which, together with the agile movement mechanics, allows the player to feel that they are always in control of the situation, without major technical suffering. Another relevant issue in performance is the presence of offline modes and bots that guarantee a continuous experience without depending on connection or online instability. Given that cooperation is one of the pillars of the game, this prevents common connection problems or network drops from harming the experience, being a positive point for those who prefer to play alone or when they are not online with friends. The game manages this transition well, maintaining constant performance even with the replacement of human players by reasonably competent artificial intelligence, which helps to maintain the pace of matches without perceptible negative impact. A more subjective point in performance that deserves to be highlighted is how much Painkiller manages to remain faithful to the chaotic, intense and fast atmosphere of the classic series without sacrificing fluidity. The game knows that it doesn't just need to be cutting-edge graphics or ultra-realistic physics to be fun. And this is evident not only in the gameplay but also in the general performance, which privileges the speed and response of the game to the player's input. Something personally very gratifying for those who like old-school shooters, but with a contemporary flavor. This choice places the game in a niche that may not make noise for everyone, but truly pleases those who enjoy a more organic and less restricted gameplay. I must admit that the performance could improve in certain very specific moments, where the density of effects causes noticeable frame drops, especially in boss battles or more complex scenarios. These small moments generate a slight sense of insecurity about the game's maximum potential, which leaves room for future updates to make it even smoother and more satisfactory. However, these negative points do not deeply compromise the fun, and the game still shines thanks to its accessible nature and constant pace, which compensate for these technical flaws in sporadic moments. Finally, Painkiller's performance gives me the impression of a game that bets a lot on providing a fun and fast cooperative experience, with stability and good responsiveness, even recognizing that it is not a title made to impress with visuals but rather with gameplay. This design decision pleases me a lot, because with the excess of games that fight to be the most beautiful and technically advanced, this bet on the mid-tier, focused on uncomplicated gaming, refreshes the industry. Therefore, despite some small irregularities, the game efficiently fulfills what it promises in terms of performance, leaving me confident to recommend the experience for those looking for an FPS that is more about fun and less about technical pomp. If you are thinking of buying at launch, it is worth highlighting that the game arrives with some modern improvements, such as fluid movement including dash, double jump, and a grappling hook to explore vertical environments, in addition to both classic and new weapons, which can be upgraded with points earned during gameplay. The game also includes a roguelike mode called Rogue Angel, which offers challenges in random arenas and can extend the longevity of the title. These characteristics make Painkiller more than a simple remake, bringing freshness to old fans and new players. My personal opinion is that Painkiller is worth buying at launch if you enjoy fast and chaotic arcade shooters, and especially if you like playing with friends online. The uncomplicated focus on frantic combat and cooperation makes the game a light and fun pastime without major complications. If your good experience comes from having fun shooting and exchanging fire against enemies without having to get stuck in the story or heavy grind, Painkiller delivers that very well. On the other hand, the game may seem repetitive for those looking for more depth, strategy, or innovation in the genre. The game is indicated for fans of frantic shooters, with a retro feel but with modernizations, for those who like boomer shooters like Doom and want something immediate and easy to pick up. It is also a feast for those who enjoy casual cooperative sessions, playing with friends and preferring quick and intense matches instead of long campaigns. Those who prefer more solitary games, with a greater challenge or elaborate narratives, may want to wait to see more post-launch reviews. Painkiller 2025 is a game that brings back the adrenaline and brutality of the old shooting arenas, with lethal weapons and fierce demonic enemies, but with a more accessible approach focused on quick and cooperative fun. For those who like the style, buying at launch is rewarding, especially for playing with friends and exploring the roguelike mode that promises to bring renewed challenges. If you are looking for this fun and unpretentious experience, I recommend investing at launch and enjoying the chaotic fun that Painkiller offers. It's worth the purchase at launch for those who identify with this style, while those who prefer something deeper can wait for future promotions. The choice depends on your player profile and your immediate desire to dive into purgatory shooting demons non-stop. Well, that was my analysis. I hope you enjoyed it and see you in the next video.